Hello, we are live here with some of our Mercy Volunteer Corps alumni that have served internationally in Guyana, South America. Tonight, they're going to share a little bit about their experience serving internationally and what that might be like for you. If you have any questions throughout, please feel free to chat us. We are happy to answer those as we go through. So if you guys would like to introduce yourselves, to start us off, tell us who you are, where you went to school, where you served, and what you're up to now.
Yeah, I can go. I'm Marissa. I am from Seattle. I went to Azusa Pacific University in California for undergrad and studied journalism. I got to kind of study abroad and do some international service while I was there, which just kind of made me interested in doing Mercy Volunteer Corps and something service oriented after graduation. So I served at Mercy Wings Vocational Center in Guyana for 2 years. And then came back, and then COVID hit when I came after a couple months after I came back. And I applied for a teaching program at St. Joe's in Philadelphia because I had some friends and some Mercy connections out in Philly. So I moved here, and I'm doing a 2-year master's degree right now in education through them.
And hi, my name is Anna. I actually graduated from Boston College this past May, was a math major and music minor. And so my timing doing MVC was a little bit unconventional. I actually took a gap year kind of in lieu of my junior year of college and did MVC and served at Bosco Academy in Guyana. So did that for just 1 year and then went back to school for my senior year. COVID hit while I was in Guyana. So I was evacuated in March of 2020. And then did senior year mostly online. And now I'm living in Boston, working as a tech consultant, trying to figure out where life is going to take me next.
Yay, thanks so much for being here. I'm excited to hear your journeys and stories of Guyana. Can you talk a little bit about what the discernment process was like for you? What were some feelings that came up? What supports were helpful for you as you considered a year of service?
Yeah, as I was saying with like wanting to do some kind of service oriented work after graduation, I was looking mostly between Mercy Volunteer Corps and the Peace Corps. And it was just kind of, I think the discernment process was just trying to learn how to go with my gut. There was a former Mercy volunteer from a cohort before me that had said something about that of like paying attention to your daydreams. And that was something I really took into account when I was in my discernment process, was like, okay, even though I'm looking at Guyana with MVC, and then I was looking at Sierra Leone with Peace Corps, like where, I've never been to either of these places, like where do I find my daydreams just kind of naturally going? And I just kind of found it more aligned with MVC. I was really drawn, especially to the pillars, and that there was so much support as well. I remember I had back-to-back days of interviews with the 2 different organizations, and just after meeting and like chatting with one of the MVC reps, I remember afterwards just being like, oh, this feels very comfortable and I feel very valued and like almost known after just one single phone call. And it was just sort of a feeling of like I was being able to listen to my gut and like I was in the right spot. And just knowing I'd be living in a community was really important to me as well. Just knowing I had that in-country support of other volunteers going through the same thing, instead of just kind of being thrown into it by myself, as well as knowing there's the support of the actual MVC network back in the States too, that I could come home to, as well as when I was in Guyana. So just kind of having that aspect of community, as well as knowing the value of spirituality too, that it was something that was also integrated just into the everyday life, and the social justice too was just like, I could just go on each of them. Also the simple living, really all of them were all just really huge factors for me, that I liked the structure of those and knowing that my time would be very intentional with each of those areas.
Yeah, so like I said, I did MVC as a gap year. So I was kind of in this place where I was definitely wanting to do some sort of service program. And so I was looking at a couple different service programs. And especially as I was discerning international versus domestic service, that was really big in terms of like looking at, Marissa mentioned this, but the program and what sort of supports were offered, whether you were alone or with other volunteers, or what that community looked like. And so community was something I was really looking for. Yeah, so I wasn't really looking for like a specific place that I was going. I was not familiar with Guyana before applying to MBC, as a lot of people were not. But yeah, I was really just looking for like a program that I felt like I could fit in with, values wise, and just like be around like-minded people. I think in my discernment process, something that was really helpful and big for me was just kind of like similar to what Marissa said of going with her gut, but like me learning how to like sit with myself and figure out like what I was actually feeling. I think especially being in college, I had a lot of voices around me saying this is what you should and should not do. Really like wise voices, lots of trusted mentors, family, friends, awesome people. Some people also trying to discourage me from doing it, but just felt like there were a lot of different opinions. So I think huge in my discernment process was just being able to sit with the decision or sit with my future just alone. I grew a lot in my faith in college, so that was also huge of like bringing it to God, and really like praying through what this year would look like. And so that was really big of just like noticing different emotions that were coming up, noticing what I was thinking about, what I was excited about, what felt really scary. And so there were lots of different emotions, but I think that was like big, just like naming all of those as I was going through the discernment process.
Definitely. And part of our application process is a discernment weekend, which is a great opportunity, like you said, Anna, to practice like sitting with yourself and taking some tools so that you can process and really listen to what is the right next step for you. So take us to, now you're in Guyana, you're working at your service site. What does your service site do? And what did kind of a day look like for you in your work?
Yeah, so I was at Mercy Wings Vocational Center, which is a trade school for teens aged like 15 to, I had students as old as like 26, who were looking to get a certificate in 1 year, either in construction, catering, childcare, or cosmetology. And I was teaching like basic level English and math, and then co-teaching a computer class with a Guyanese coworker. And as someone who didn't have an education background, this was pretty intimidating. But I feel like my coworkers were really great, and admin was super great at just helping me find my niche, find what I needed to do. And yeah, every day I would just have a different group of students depending on which trade kind of had me that day for English or math or computers, and we just kind of work with wherever they were at. In whatever subject. It was smaller class sizes, which was nice. So I felt like I got to really develop some of those more personal, like one-on-one relationships as well with students. And would just kind of depend on the day, you know, with the volunteer role, kind of part of what I enjoyed is just like, you get to be the extra person that sometimes one day we needed a chaperone on a cricket tournament. They said, all right, Rissa, you get to take all the boys to a cricket tournament as like the one adult here. And I was like, all right, here we go. And it was a blast. I mean, it was just fun to kind of be just in that kind of flexible, adaptable role of like, all right, this is the need we have today. And we would love for you to help meet it or meet us along the journey with it in some way. And it was just kind of a fun spot to be in. But I would be there. School is from 8 to 3:30 each day, and then half days on Fridays. And so my schedule would just kind of depend on the day, but it followed just like a pretty regular school schedule. Yeah, I think that's kind of the main components of what my day at Mercy Wings looked like.
And I was a teacher at Bosco Academy, so the Sisters of Mercy in Guyana run a boys' orphanage called Bosco. And the primary school boys, so like elementary aged or elementary ability boys, would go to a private school at the orphanage. That was just boys from the orphanage. And then when they got to secondary school, they would go to public school in Georgetown. So the primary school was like a private school at the orphanage, was about a little less than 20 boys, I think. And so pretty small, and all of them spent all of their time together because they lived there and went to school there as well. So I was a grade 5 teacher for most of the year. And so I was a grade 5 teacher, but very kind of like what Marissa was saying too. Similar at Bosco, very small classes, and like boys were placed based on ability, not based on age, which is really important, but also meant that my class, I had an 8-year-old, 2 12-year-olds, and a 14-year-old. So definitely a large spectrum of, just emotional intelligence, and everything that goes along with the difference between an 8-year-old kid and a 14-year-old. But it was a blast. I think that, like Marissa, I also didn't have a teaching background, which was intimidating. But I think that especially at Bosco, it was very much like learning how to like meet kids where they were at. And so I had a lot of like tutoring experience and like smaller class experience, which I thought was really helpful. And I think that my role more resembled like a small class teacher, or like one-on-one tutor, and trying to do that with 4 different people at once, rather than like the traditional school classroom that you could imagine. But Bosco had both, so it was me and another volunteer who were there, but then also Guyanese teachers. So it was also really cool to be able to learn from them. And they were also super interested about different strategies that we would use in the classroom, which was cool, but very like collaborative work. I like would not teach social studies, like could not teach Guyanese history, so another teacher would come in and teach that. So definitely very collaborative, and really just like a really sweet place to be. So was there for the school day, and then 2 days a week I would also stay after school and play football or cricket or whatever other games we were playing after school. Just kind of hang out with both the primary school boys and then also the older boys when they got home from school. So Bosco is just an awesome place to hang out and play, but also an awesome service site to teach at.
Both of you kind of alluded to this, but I would love to hear a little bit more about what it means to serve compassionately, what you learned about it, and what it meant to you at your service site.
I think for me, a lot of it comes down to solidarity, of just trying to also keep that mercy spirit at your site of, I don't know, I think Anna put it well, of just kind of like meeting kids where they're at, meeting students where they're at, whether you're at like a specific school site like Bosco or Mercy Wings, or if you're in a different site, possibly like serving elderly people or a different community, just kind of coming at it with an open heart and an open mind. And I think a lot of the simple living pillar kind of ties back to that living in solidarity of like at home, trying to live in a similar, like simple fashion, that, you know, that the people that you are serving each day might be living in a similar situation too. Yeah, I think a lot of it just kind of comes to trying to live in solidarity, trying to be open-minded and open-hearted wherever you're placed at for your service site.
Yeah, Marissa explained that really well. I think just the one thing I would add, I think something I thought a lot about while I was in Guyana, is kind of this tension between wanting to do whatever was in front of you, but also I found myself just like learning more about systems of injustice and just different things that would just make me serve differently, and just cause me to respond differently in situations because of different circumstances or systems that I was becoming aware about. So I think that it's this mix of solidarity, like Marissa was saying, of really just being aware of context, especially because it was an international context that I was unfamiliar with. I was the outsider there, so wanting to come under and really serve with humility there, and like being aware of this large context, but also zooming in and being able to serve and love like the person right in front of you. So I think that was, especially at Bosco, really significant for me in the context of compassionate service, was being able to like be fully present for whatever student was in front of me, regardless of how angry education systems or different systems that I'd seen fail the student again and again were making me.
And for those of you watching, we do have additional service sites in Guyana. So Anna and Marissa have both served in our education placements. We also have opportunities working with elderly as activities coordinators or in nursing as well. Let's talk a little bit about life in community. So a big piece of life in community is spiritual growth. So Mercy volunteers have weekly spirituality nights and have retreats throughout the year. Would you share with us maybe a spirituality night or a retreat activity that really stuck with you, or kind of changed your perspective or felt like a really strong growth moment?
Yeah, I both years had a community member do kind of this walk around the outside of our house in Guyana, where we kind of walked around each wall of our house and said like a blessing over it, and just kind of came together like this is our space that we're sharing together, and like this is our physical home as well as where our community will be like dwelling. And so on each side of the house, we just kind of said like a blessing or a prayer over our community and over our home. I think just kind of that like physical aspect of walking around was really just kind of a nice tie-in of like, this is our space, this is where our community will be living, and just like wanting to bless that and have a celebration of that. And I think just kind of on a side note too, a nice thing with the spirituality nights is like that you can be of any spirituality background and can like get something out of and like be able to grow in your spirituality. We had in both years my community people from lots of different spiritual backgrounds, religious faith backgrounds, and just being able to learn from one another. Sometimes we would do more of a social justice oriented activity of trying to learn more about the community we were in, about systems of injustice and structural racism, things like that, that we could like bring together and discuss openly and vulnerably in spirituality nights. Just was a really special space to be able to have some of those more intimate, vulnerable conversations, whether it ended up leaning more towards a prayer route or more towards like a social justice conversation or activity like that.
Yeah, one of, I think, my favorite parts about spirituality nights was, like Marissa said, my community was also pretty diverse in terms of different spiritual backgrounds, but also where we were each at spiritually then. And so kind of like a commitment we made to each other at the beginning of the year was that we were going to just like be authentic in leading spirituality nights, and really like, so we alternated, each of us would lead, but it was a commitment to like be authentic in leading, of like actually sharing like something that you were able to participate in spiritually, and then also like committing to being fully present and just like honoring that person. So I think that was really just like overall really sweet to be able to like feel known. If it wasn't just like finding the small intersection of all four of our spiritual journeys, but really being able to like know my community better and feel known by them. Because I think I mentioned this earlier, but just like growing a lot in my faith, that is like something that is and like was in Guyana really important to me. And I think a specific spirituality night that stood out to me when you asked this question was, we had one, it was pretty simple. We just kind of like journaled and then discussed around the question of what paradise looks like. And I think that like just the diversity of my community, of the directions that our answers went into, I feel like it really just like, we talked about salvation and talked about like what happens when you die, and like what are the biggest joys, and all of these different things. It just like led to really authentic communication or conversation. So I think that was huge, of just like having a space that like we each could be fully authentic, and like be heard, and like know each other more on a deeper level in a spiritual sense too.
How about your commitment to live simply? So simplicity is making intentional choices that are rooted in discovering and being present to one another and the earth. So what were some ways that you lived simply during your year of service, and how did that open up space for some of your other deeper values or avenues to live out your values?
Yeah, I think some of it was just came down to like, it's not just about like the simple living budget, right? It's not just about like, okay, however much money you have every month, like that's it, you're done, that's your simple living, like you're covered. I feel like what you were saying, it's so much more about intentionality. Sometimes for us that looked like we would do a silent rice and beans dinner every week in my community, because it was like a time just to focus on the actual food that we were eating and thinking about where it came from, and it had to work to be able to get that to our table that night. And it just kind of led to some really cool conversations after, if we could just all be in silence, like sharing silence together. Kind of felt like it was kind of bringing together the community aspect and spirituality and the simple living all kind of in one space. And also just knowing that a lot of our students and communities that we worked alongside were probably having something similar for dinner too, kind of brought that solidarity aspect in as well. Sometimes it looked like just being very mindful of like our water use, and with showers, maybe just taking bucket showers, to be mindful of how much water we were using. Everywhere in Guyana, you'll always see these like signs and billboards that just says like water is life. Like that's just one of the, I think it's their Guyana Water Incorporation's like motto or something, of just like that is such a key thing, especially when you're living in a very, very hot country. And so just trying to be mindful of things like your food, your water, budgeting, making a note of where you're spending things, and like noticing what you're spending your money on, and just being mindful of that, and then being able to save as a community so that we could share something together. For both of my years, our community at one of our spirituality nights did like a love languages test, and all of us, our very last love language was gifts. And so we were all there for Christmas, and we're like, well, none of us really feel especially loved by like receiving gifts necessarily. So we're like, okay, most of us for quality time, so let's go, we're going to save and like do some kind of trip or something together. And that just became like a really lovely holiday thing to kind of look, and like a way nicer memory than like if we had gotten each other something from the market. It was just so nice to have kind of be extra mindful of our money, be able to spend time with each other. Our house also didn't have Wi-Fi or internet, so that was kind of nice sometimes just to come home and you can't just like go on your phone or your computer or anything. It's like the amount of times that we just be out on the veranda chatting, journaling, reading together, playing games, just like it kind of, I don't want to say force because I'm glad for it, but it just kind of like requires you to spend more time together and kind of deepen and develop those relationships as well. So yeah, I feel like some of those simple living things are just kind of naturally come with the territory. And then others, I feel like there's some really great opportunity to be able to mindfully make decisions as a community for where you're going to spend your money, what you're going to do with your resources, how you're going to spend your time too.
Yeah, I think I would just parrot Marissa saying that like some things naturally came with Guyana, just like living in Guyana. There's some things that were very obvious that were simple. There wasn't really too big of another option, but there were some things that were more intentional. So also parroting Marissa, I think not having Wi-Fi was huge. I like honestly loved it. Definitely hard at some points, but yeah, but was really like a cool, just like awareness thing too. And I think has really like affected me even after getting back from Guyana. And just like being aware of what I'm spending my time doing, and like really just like enjoying sitting in our living room and just chatting as a community at night, other than like people being on their phones. Yeah, one thing that I also really loved about simple living, well, love-hate relationship with this, but was definitely part of our like simple living plan was doing our laundry by hand. So we didn't have a washing machine, so also like kind of forced, but I ended up really just like loving that as like an intentional part of my week. I think like Andrea said, like things that also connect you to the earth, of like taking care of myself. So taking care of myself and like connecting to like cleaning my own clothes and like being aware of how much water goes into that, having them dry in the sun, all these things, just like the time that it took to do that, rather than just like throwing your clothes in the washing machine and walking away. I think just like more deeply connected me with like the way things actually work, rather than just taking like these machines for granted. And then, so something else that's kind of like built into the program is your budget, which is simple. It's like definitely enough, but it's definitely simple. And I think something that stood out to me is that, so it's enough, but not enough to shop at like the supermarket all the time, or even like the closest place. And so that was part of our like intentionality in simple living, was like just being mindful of when we went to the market, of like buying food that we could afford, and not just kind of grabbing whatever off the shelf of the supermarket. Because they're in Guyana, they're both supermarkets and markets. And the supermarkets tend to be more expensive. So really just like being mindful of that, and also doing that as a community too, of like we all had to be invested in living simply, to be able to live as a community off that budget. So
yeah, thanks so much for your thoughtful responses. We do provide stipends for the volunteers while they're serving, as well as housing, transportation, health insurance, all that good stuff. So the budget is surely a part of that simple living, but it is so much more than that as well. Thinking about living in an intentional community, how is that more than just being roommates with one another? And how is living in community while serving internationally helpful?
Yeah, I feel like my buzzword tonight is just going to be intentionality, but that's fine. I think the living in community is so much about building an intentional relationship with the people that you're there with. It's not just like, you're not just going to kind of let something go by the wayside if it's bothering you. It's like you're willing to have maybe a tough conversation with somebody, or you're willing to invest in each other, whether you feel super close to each other one day or if you're frustrated with someone the next. It's like you're not willing to tune out or just zone out from a relationship. It's like you're willing to stick with it for the time that you're there, and to invest in each other's well-being, whatever that might look like. Even, yeah, on some days it's like super easy. You're like, oh, everyone's getting along, things are good, which was like, I mean, most days I feel like, but then there's some days where you might just feel really just worn out or exhausted, or you feel like some kind of tension or something, which when you're all living in a cross-cultural setting, sometimes that just is going to happen, which is totally normal and fine. But I think the key difference between if you're just in a roommate situation and something happened, or there was some kind of conflict you had to work through, versus community, is that you're willing to work through some of the hard stuff too, because it does create such a more beautiful, enriching, rewarding experience. I'm really grateful for my communities, both of my years too. I lived with one of my community members when I moved back to the States. I still see a couple of them now, even though I moved cross country, which I'm very lucky to have had that chance. Yeah, I think just kind of intentionally willing to stick it out with each other. I think especially cross culturally, it's like you come home to each other every day and you all know what each other have experienced without even having to talk about your day. It's like you're all going through the same experience of being foreigners, like Anna was saying, being cultural outsiders, of coming through and coming in with your different cultural lenses and trying to understand and learn and humble yourselves. And sometimes that's the best resource, to come home one day and just be like, you will not believe what I said today. That was like completely like culturally irrelevant or something. I don't know. There's just sometimes just funny things that you come home and you're like, oh my gosh, this happened today. And it like reminded me of this other thing from home. Or there's just like always those kind of like funny connections or stories that I feel like no one else will necessarily get except the people that you're living with, that you're coming back with every day, your community. And I think just knowing that you're all pursuing and striving to kind of stick with those pillars too, knowing that you all are there for the simple living, the spirituality, the social justice, like just kind of having that solidarity with each other as well, I feel like is just such a beautiful, enriching experience.
Yeah, I feel like thinking back of like my discernment process, I remember like everybody kept saying community was like both the hardest and the most rewarding part of their experience. And I like don't think I really internalized that until getting to Guyana, and then realizing like absolutely that is so true. Because there's so much work that goes into it. Like community, like roommates, you can choose just to like put in work or not put in work, or it's great if you're friends, or if you're not friends, then like you can just coexist. But community is so different because it's yeah, just this investment, and like intentionality, using Marissa's word now, this intentional choice to like keep choosing each other, even if like you didn't choose each other at first too. So that's, I think, one of the interesting parts about MVC is that you're placed into a community with people that you didn't know before, probably, and have only met like a handful of times if you met them at discernment weekend, but you don't really know them going in. So I think that just, it takes a lot of work to like really get to know somebody on in like the level of depth that you're like wanting in that community. So and then, yeah, I think that what Marissa said too about like specifically internationally, there were only a handful of people who like knew what you're experiencing. And like, I have awesome friends from back home, but they didn't always understand like what I was talking about, the context that I was in. And so really like relying on the people who you're around was huge. And then we had Guyanese friends as well, but our Guyanese friends also like didn't understand the context we had come from. And so my community, all of us came from different cultures and different experiences, but there is the common ground of being new in Guyana, and choosing intentionally to be serving, to be living out these values. So there's just so much more common ground than you may think you have with your community. So definitely like lots of intentionality, lots of just like working out relationships. But I think also like that so much of that happens so naturally. If there's so much shared experience that you have with these people that, like Marissa said, I also am pretty close with my community members still. And so just like living that entire shared experience, there's a certain amount of that like doesn't take any work and is naturally going to just give you more common ground with each other.
Okay, so let's talk about Guyana. What is life like in Guyana? I know there are so many different pieces and parts, so let's hear some of that information. What's it like?
Oh gosh, you're gonna have us here for a long time then. I feel like, there's so many things. Well, basic, I think we've talked a little bit about like with simple living things. one of the simplest ways for traveling is to be taking the bus, the minibus. So it's kind of like I think the equivalent would be like a 15-passenger van, essentially, here in the States. And they're all decked out and they are like blasting dance hall or soca music or like reggae or anything. And there's like a conductor that helps like usher everybody on the bus and like takes the fare right there and everything. And it's just like such a cultural like experience of just like being on a bus with like squished up against a bunch of people trying to get to your destination. You got to yell out your stop really loud and try not to sound like a complete foreigner, which you will, and that's fine. And it's just, yeah, it's just such a great experience of just getting everywhere. I've definitely like probably broken a couple crates of eggs coming back from the market on a bus, or lost a couple watermelon, have gone rolling through the bus on my way home. And it's like, well, that's somebody's now. Okay. Yeah, transportation was just like great. And I mean, the music too, of like lots of soca, reggae, dance hall, just different Caribbean style and like origins of music that you'll hear being played everywhere. Is just like, I mean, still kind of a soundtrack to my life, I feel like. Yeah, those are like two of the main things that really stick out to me too. I would also, after work, like once a week, would go salsa dancing. So I took salsa lessons for the first like year and a half or so, just because I was like, okay, after work, just something to like just decompress a little bit, get to know other people my age, because most of the people I worked with were like a generation or two older than me. So it was just like kind of fun to meet people that were like peers, other 20 somethings. So, and just like a good way to kind of build my own community outside of like the specific Mercy community, and kind of have my own outlet too, was really nice. We would sometimes go to, sorry, I don't want to steal everything from Anna, but I'll take one more. We'd sometimes go to the seawall on weekends too. It's just a really great place right along the ocean. It's just this really old wall built by the Dutch way back when. That lots of people just go to hang out or lime, as they say, on the weekends or just the weeknights, watch the sunset. People just kind of play music, sell plantain chips, hang out, just a place to be by the ocean and just by the water. Which I was just excited about that too, to be living so close to a large body of water. Just growing up, I was always near some source of water in the Seattle area. So it was just kind of like a comforting kind of piece of home in a way when you're away from home, just to like be somewhere in nature that feels kind of familiar in a sense. Yeah.
I'll try not to repeat everything Marissa just said, but I also resonate a lot with the water. I grew up in New England, always near the water, and so it was just like really sweet to be able to be at the seawall, which yeah, it was just a fun place to meet new people, eat good food, just kind of hang out and relax, be outside. What else about Guyana? Food. I love food. And so loved just like learning how to cook everything. One of the teachers at Bosco Academy, she was this older woman, taught first grade, had been teaching her entire life, like sweetest woman ever. But also kind of just like everybody's grandmother and like a little bit harsh, but anyway, she would constantly on our lunch break just like come up to me and be like, Anna, what'd you cook last night? And like I would tell her whoever in my community had cooked, I'd like tell her what they made, and she'd be like, no. And she would explain to me what we had done wrong and how we should be cooking everything. And so, and I feel like there were a number of other people who were willing to do that, of cooking, teaching us how to cook curry and roti and lots of different foods. Guyanese food is a mix of like Indian food, Chinese food, some Creole food, like Caribbean food, Portuguese, there's Amerindian, like indigenous. So there's a lot of different foods, lots of different like cultures that are conglomerating into this like single Guyanese culture, which yeah, was reflected in food. So I really loved that. And people just like wanting to hang out over food and like cook together, eat together, spend time doing that. then semi-related, one of my other favorite places to go, and definitely a cool part of Guyana, was to go to the markets. And so there are like two big markets in Georgetown, but also a lot of different markets like within the villages too. And so when we go to the big markets, that just like, I feel like there's like a sense of accomplishment of like feeling like you're at home at the market, of like being able to go to like your regular fruit and vegetable stand, and like having people know who you are by like a couple of months in. Like the people we'd always buy from, they knew our names, they knew what we wanted. So that was cool, just to like feel known and just like feel like you were home there. And so the markets are loud, everyone's yelling at you, but it's cool to like explore new things, look at a random vegetable I'd never seen before and just bring it home and buy it and try and cook it. My community really liked to like experiment with cooking things that we did not recognize. So that was really fun, and a fun way just to like engage with, with Guyanese, and just like ask them more about what they like to cook and what they like to do.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. I'm wondering, as we start wrapping up here, if you have any advice for the folks that are watching who are considering a year of service or international service, what would you like to tell them?
I mean, I think I'd just pass on the advice I received from community before me of just like paying attention to your daydreams. I feel like that's kind of served me well through other discernment processes that I've needed to go through, of just like pay attention to what makes your soul feel alive, what makes you feel like drawn to something, and just like not burying that feeling or dismissing it, but like really sitting with it and paying attention and honoring that feeling and honoring those gut instincts of where you think you're meant to be, wherever that might look like. But yeah, I think just kind of learning to honor and respect where your mind kind of goes to and where your gut is telling you might be the spot for you or the placement.
Yeah, I love that, Marissa. That's good. I think I would just add to that. I don't know. I think this was significant for me in my discernment process. So I feel like advice-wise, I would say, just like learning or going through the process, like the work of being able to sit with yourself in this decision. Like listening to the voices around you, but also making sure that like throughout the process, you're getting time to think about it for yourself. Because at the end of the day, like if you find yourself in Guyana, just because you're listening to the people around you, that may not carry you too far. So really being able to like sit with like what you want to do. And then I think something big, like specifically for Guyana and for MBC, of just like really looking into like the values. I feel like there are so many different service programs with lots of different values all over the place. And so I think that like something that makes MBC unique is like the people that come committed to like the pillars. And so I think specifically internationally, like community, thinking about that and just like wanting to intentionally say yes to that. Because I think that is huge, and and just going to be common ground for you and your community. Going to just allow all of you to have a better experience and to be able to support each other better. So really just paying attention to that for MVC, but also any service programs that you're discerning right now.
Such wise words from both of you. Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives and your stories of serving in Guyana. For those of you watching who are interested, we are currently accepting applications for service starting in August of 2022 in Guyana. We are very hopeful to return in the hopes that the pandemic will, be under control or in a better place by then. So we are accepting applications. You can do that all online at mercyvolunteers.org/apply. If you are looking for some support or tools in discernment, we are having a discernment webinar on November 17th at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern time. So we would love to have you for that as well, or feel free to reach out and talk with us some more at contact us at mercyvolunteers.org. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. And thank you, Marissa and Anna, for sharing your stories with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.